Let me begin today of my reflections and homily on some adverbial expressions that the evangelist John is saying to us in the gospel passage today. At that time, Jesus again revealed himself. So the word again, or the adverb against, give us some sort of a bearing on our understanding of the resurrection of Jesus. And then later on in the same chapter, chapter 21, verse 15, the evangelist says, or reminds the audience, us today, this was now the third time Jesus was revealed to his disciples. As I reflected on this gospel passage during this very special time of Easter, I asked myself, how many times did Jesus have to reveal himself to his disciples? Allowed me to bring us back to a week ago on the same gospel of John. We read in chapter 20, verses 11 to 19 to 31. In that, the evangelist, at the end of that passage, tells his audience, of course, those who read in the first century or the second century, who read his gospel, and today we listen to that passage. He said, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book. But these are written that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that through this belief you may have life in his name. So once again, the evangelist goes out of his way to tell not only the early Christian in the second century down through the age to our own time that Jesus appeared or did many other signs in the presence of his disciples. I, for one, asked the question, did Jesus really did the sign in my presence? Before I revealed my answer, allowed me to explain a little bit more in the earlier passage today. Now, 2 weeks ago, at the 11:30 Mass on Easter Sunday, I was not scheduled for the 9 o'clock, but I did in that gospel passage of chapter 20, verses 1 to 9. And then we have a sequence of verses 10 to 18. And in that long passage, if you recall, there was 3 characters. One is Mary Magdalene, the other was Peter, and the third one, which stands out, was the disciple whom Jesus loved. In that homily, at the end, I asked the questions, or at least raise an awareness to all of us, which character each of us would want to identify with. Was it Peter, who ran into the tomb, saw the tomb empty, but did not have the proclamation, the verbal proclamation that Jesus was risen? Or like Mary Magdalene, who ran to the tomb first, then ran up, reported to Peter and the disciple, and on the sound like the same day when Jesus appeared to her, in the later of the same day, she too, like Peter, did not come to the verbal expression or confession that she believed. In today's, once again, last week, a week later, which is last weekend, we heard the passage in which Jesus appeared to the disciples with Thomas, the one who known to us not only as the one who doubts, but known to us as the twin. And Thomas, at the end of the conversion or conversation with Jesus, he proclaimed, "My Lord and my God." So the evangelist gives out many incidents, at least today, as the gospel says, 3 times, in which Jesus appeared to his disciples. Let us bring ourselves back to this very gospel passage. business as usual seemed to Peter and the other 6 disciples in today's gospel as they were on the Sea of Tiberias, also known as the Sea of Galilee. And on that shore, Peter goes on, says, I'm going fishing. And the other join him. Business as usual, life goes on. Now, there's some time between the time frame or the marker of time of last week of the reading and today's reading. We don't know how the period, the interim period between last weekend's reading and today's weekend's reading, but at least that today's the 3rd time, again, the 3rd time that Jesus appeared to them. And once again, the only one among Jesus' disciples recognizes Jesus. It is the Lord. He is or she is the one whom Jesus loved. Now, put those 2 statements together or backward. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. The evangelists try to put it in such a way that Peter and among other disciples, human beings like us, constantly in need of reminders, of being reminded that Jesus is there. The risen Jesus is with them. Can they recognize him? And of course, we should not expect that Jesus appear to us in the way we want him to appear to us. But we ought to find ways to look out, to seek and to fetch for the risen Jesus in our lives, in business as usual things in our lives. So the question I asked earlier, does Jesus appear in what I do daily? And the answer I would wanted to share with you is affirmative and positive, yes. And how do we recognize Jesus in our lives? Just go back to, once again, the gospel today. It is almost like in a way that the evangelist is telling us that Peter and the other disciples, Jesus was there. But their mind and their heart, because of the business as usual, that they were marred or barred from recognizing Jesus, it needs the one who is loved by Jesus, the disciple whom Jesus loved, to remind them that it is the Lord, vice versa, in order for everyone and all of us or each of us to come to the point to recognize that Jesus is there. It is the Lord Jesus. It is the one who was raised from the dead by God. We almost have to do what the disciple whom Jesus loved did, namely to love one another. The second half of the gospel passage today gives us just that much. As Jesus asked Peter 3 times, Simon Peter, do you love me? And in response to Jesus and Simon Peter said, yes, I do. And Jesus asked him, feed my lamb, tend my sheep. By doing that, it's not that we can stay home or looking at, for example, social media, TV, and say that I love other people around us. Love here has to do with contact, has to do with human relationship, how we interact with one another in person. That is the point. I believe that when we encounter another human being, particularly the ones who believe in God and the ones who believe in the resurrection of Jesus, and we treat that person the best that we can, That human relationship is the gateway to all of us to say to ourselves, it is the Lord, the risen Jesus who lives in that person, who is in fact present in that person, just as much as God is present in us. In order for the beloved disciple to have the privilege to remind Simon Peter and the rest of his disciples, it is the Lord. It's because that beloved disciple, whether we can recognize or we try to be that person, we should. But in order for us to come, or for that disciple whom Jesus loved to say that it is the Lord, the other way also invite us to remind ourselves that we too have to reach out to our brothers and sisters, not through simply through verbal connection, but through human and human connection, through in-person interaction with one another. To love here cannot be done through words, but it has to be done in actions and in one-on-one relationship. Easter reminds us that God is living, Jesus is living, and it is for each and every one of us to enact that belief, that faith in the living God, in the risen Jesus, through our encounter with one another. It is really an invitation. There's no concrete way for all of us to do so, but it is an invitation to each of us to find our own ways, to find the best way for us to come to terms that, to recognize that Jesus is risen is through our meeting and interacting with one another.